Chapter 12. The Dark Island. After this adventure they sailed on south and a little east for 12 days with a gentle wind, the skies being mostly clear and the air warm, and saw no bird or fish, except that once there were whales spouting a long way to the starboard. Lucy and Reecheap played a good deal of chess at this time. Then, on the 13th day, Edmund, from the fighting top, sighted what looked like a great dark mountain rising out of the sea on their port bow. They altered course, and made for this land, mostly by oar, for the wind would not serve them to sail northeast. When evening fell they were still a long way from it, and rowed all night. Next morning the weather was fair, but a flat calm. The dark mass lay ahead, much nearer and larger, but still very dim, so that some thought it was still a long way off, and others thought they were running into a mist. About 9 that morning, very suddenly, it was so close that they could see that it was not land at all, nor even, in an ordinary sense, a mist. It was a darkness. It is rather hard to describe, but you will see what it was like if you imagine yourself looking into the mouth of a railway tunnel, a tunnel either so long or so twisty that you cannot see the light at the far end. And you know what it would be like. For a few feet you would see the rails and sleepers and gravel in the broad daylight. Then there would come a place where they were in twilight, and then, pretty suddenly, but of course without a sharp dividing line, they would vanish altogether into smooth, solid blackness. It was just so here. For a few feet in front of their bows they could see the swell of the bright greenish-blue water. Beyond that, they could see the water looking pale and grey as it would look late in the evening. But beyond that again, utter blackness, as if they'd come to the edge of moonless and starless night. Caspian shouted to the boatswain to keep her back, and all except the rowers rushed forward and gazed from the bows. But there was nothing to be seen by gazing. Behind them was the sea and the sun. Before them was the darkness. "Do we go into this?" asked Caspian at length. "Not by my advice," said Drinian. "The captain's right," said several sailors. "I almost think he is," said Edmund. Lucy and Eustace didn't speak, but felt very glad inside at the turn the thing seemed to be taking. But all at once the clear voice of Reepicheep broke in upon the silence. "And why not?" he said. "Will someone explain to me why not?" No one was anxious to explain, so Reepicheep continued. "If we were addressing peasants or slaves," he said, "I might suppose that this suggestion proceeded from cowardice. But I hope it will never be told in Narnia that a company of noble and royal persons in the flower of their age turned tail because they were afraid of the dark." "But what manner of use would it be ploughing through that blackness?" asked Drinian. "Use?" replied Reepicheep. "Use, captain? If by use you mean by filling our bellies or our purses, I confess it will be of no use at all. So far as I know, we did not set sail to look for things useful, but to seek honor and adventures, and here is as great an adventure as ever I have heard of, and here, if we turn back, no little impeachment of all our honors." Several of the soldiers said things under their breath that sounded like, "Honor be blowed," but Caspian said, "Oh, bother you, Reepicheep. I almost wish we'd left you at home. All right, if you put it that way, I suppose we shall have to go on, unless Lucy would rather not." Lucy felt that she would very much rather not, but what she said aloud was, "I'm game." "Your Majesty will at least order lights," said Drinian. "By all means," said Caspian. "See to it, Captain." So the 3 lanterns at the stern and the prow and the masthead were all lit, and Drinian ordered 2 torches amidships. Pale and feeble they looked in the sunshine. Then all the men, except some who were left below at the oars, were ordered on deck and fully armed and posted in their battle stations with swords drawn. Lucy and 2 archers were posted on the fighting tops with bows bent and arrows on the string. Rhinef was in the bows with his line ready to take soundings. Reepicheep, Edmund, Eustace, and Caspian, glittered in mail, were with him. Drinian took the tiller. "And now, in Aslan's name, forward!" cried Caspian. A slow, steady stroke, and let every man be silent and keep his ears open for orders. With a creak and a groan, the Dwn Trdr started to creep forward as the men began to row. Lucy, up in the fighting top, had a wonderful view of the exact moment at which they entered the darkness. The bows had already disappeared before the sunlight had left the stern. She saw it go. One moment the gilded stern, the blue sea, and the sky were all in broad daylight. Next minute the sea and sky had vanished. The stern lantern, which had been hardly noticeable before, was the only thing to show where the ship ended. In front of the lantern she could see the black shape of Drin crouched at the tiller. Down below her the two torches made visible two small patches of deck, and gleamed on swords and helmets, and forward there was another island of light on the forecastle. Apart from that, the fighting top, lit by the masthead light, which was only just above her, seemed to be a little lighted world of its own, floating in lonely darkness. And the lights themselves, as always happens with lights when you have them at the wrong time of day, looked lurid and unnatural. She also noticed that she was very cold. How long this voyage into the darkness lasted, nobody knew, except for the creak of the rowlocks and the splash of the oars. There was nothing to show that they were moving at all. Edmund, peering from the bows, could see nothing except the reflection of the lantern in the water before him. It looked a greasy sort of reflection, and the ripple made by their advancing prow appeared to be heavy, small, and lifeless. As time went on, everybody except the rowers began to shiver with cold. Suddenly, from somewhere, no one's sense of direction was very clear by now, there came a cry, either of some inhuman voice, or else a voice of one in such extremity of terror that he had almost lost his humanity. Caspian was still trying to speak. His mouth was too dry, when the shrill voice of Reepicheep, which sounded louder than usual in that silence, was heard. "Who calls?" it piped. "If you are a foe, we do not fear you, and if you are a friend, your enemies shall be taught to fear the fear of us." "Mercy!" cried the voice. "Mercy! Even if you are only one more dream, have mercy! Take me on board! Take me, even if you strike me dead! But in the name of all mercies, do not fade away and leave me in this horrible land." "Where are you?" shouted Caspian. "Come aboard and welcome." There came another cry, whether of joy or terror, and then they knew that someone was swimming towards them. "Stand by to heave him up, men," said Caspian. "Aye, aye, Captain. Aye, aye, your Majesty," said the sailors. Several crowded to the port bulwarks with ropes, and one, leaning far out over the side, held the torch. A wild white face appeared in the blackness of the water, and then, after some scrambling and pulling, a dozen friendly hands had heaved the stranger on board. Edmund thought he had never seen a wilder-looking man. Though he did not otherwise look very old, his hair was an untidy mop of white, his face was thin and drawn, and for clothing only a few wet rags hung about him. But what one mainly noticed were his eyes, which were so widely opened that he seemed to have no eyelids at all, and stared as if in a moment in an agony of pure fear. The moment his feet reached the deck, he said, "Fly, fly, about your ship and fly! Row, row, row for your lives away from this accursed shore!" "Compose yourself," said Reepicheep, "and tell us what the danger is. We are not used to flying." The stranger started horribly at the voice of the mouse, which he had not noticed before.